Yeah. So for our listeners and our viewers, guys, we've got Matt Doherty on the line here. Really excited to have him in the mix. And Matt, thank you for meeting with us this morning. Yeah, we appreciate that. And so what we want to kind of talk about today is I'd love for people to hear a little bit about your story, just in terms of your coaching career. Obviously, you played at North Carolina, and you've had a ton of experience in coaching and doing a whole bunch of other stuff. So would love for you to just kind of give us a little bit of your path after you got done playing. What did coaching look like for you?
Yeah, well, at first, Colin, I didn't want to coach. I didn't care to do it. I went to New York. I thought I wanted to make money, and I realized after about 4 years of working on Wall Street that wasn't me. You know, I had a hard time. You know, when they ask you your goals on Wall Street, it's basically how much money do you want to make. And I remember when somebody asked me that question, I gave the answer, and I was like, felt a little dirty saying it, and and then I quit and moved to Charlotte and Greensboro. My college roommate was in Greensboro, so I bounced between Greensboro and Charlotte, and my intent was to get in the real estate business. Ironically, this was like 1989, and you look at Charlotte now, and I could have been the worst real estate guy in Charlotte and probably still made a lot of money with the way things have gone in Charlotte. But basketball drew me. I was doing the radio at Davidson College, and I was coaching an AAU team at the time. And I really loved the coaching. And then Davidson made a coaching change and hired Bob McKillop, who was my high school coach my first 2 years in high school.
Oh, wow.
So I joined Bob's staff and worked my tail off. I wasn't making a lot of money, but I loved it. And so that led to a move to Kansas, and I worked for Roy Williams for 7 years, and then I was the head coach at North Carolina, and then a head coach at Notre Dame, and then a head coach at North Carolina. And that was a quick ascension, and sometimes too quick. And as a result, I learned some hard lessons, and I was asked to leave my alma mater, which was a very painful process.
Yeah.
And, didn't know where to turn. So I moved to the Mooresville area, to Charlotte, and did some TV, did some real estate, and enjoyed it. Enjoyed the quality of life, but just felt like I needed to try to coach one more time. And so I got a job at FAU, which is Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton. And I remember the first day on the job opening the drawer to get a pen, and the drawer fell out of my lap and pens went flying all over. And I was like, oh my God, what did I just do? You know, like 2 years ago, I was flying in private planes to go see recruits, and now I can't even find a pen without breaking the desk.
Right.
And it was kind of a depressing process, but it also made me realize that no matter what level, you enjoy coaching basketball. And I probably enjoyed coaching that year because I was with some friends, Rex Walters, Malcolm Farmer, Mike Bellato. We had a real good staff. Lil Hemi was our assistant, and it was a real good staff, good camaraderie, and in a way, the good thing is no one cared, you know, so it was just coaching.
Right.
And so that was a fun year, and that led to the transition to SMU in Dallas. And then I was there 6 and asked to leave, and that's what happens with coaches. You know, you get hired to get fired sometimes, and it's a beautiful game, nasty business.
Right, and we're seeing so much of that right now this time of year, March Madness. You know, so many of these guys that do really well in their mid-major programs, and then they're getting offered a bigger job, and some of the guys that aren't doing so well at the big programs seem like they get the axe.
Yeah, it used to be like you had a 5-year window. Now it's like you have a 3-year window. And it's really very difficult. It's a little out of whack. There's probably too much money involved, and with that comes the demands,
Sure.
and I know Coach Smith didn't get into coaching for the money. I know Roy Williams didn't get coaching for the money, and I know I didn't get in coaching for the money.
Right.
You're not going to turn it down, but I don't know necessarily if it's been great for the game.
Right. Well, one of the things that you said as you were ascending in your career, it was a quick ascension, and you said you said that might have been too quick. What in for our coaches that are wanting to progress very quickly, what do you mean by too quick of an ascension?
Well, it was a big jump. You go from an assistant coach to being a head coach at Notre Dame. I mean, that's a big jump. We all want the biggest house, the biggest car, the biggest job, right? Mm-hmm. And then I go from after 9 months being at Notre Dame to the head coach at North Carolina.
Right.
And so, I jokingly say it's like being the general manager of Ace Hardware, and then you go and you're the CEO of GE. Right. That's a huge jump. And the things that aren't taught, and I was having this conversation earlier today, that aren't taught in our profession are the leadership, soft skills.
Yeah.
You're taught as an assistant coach how to recruit, maybe how to run a shell defense and how to do a scouting report.
Right.
But you're not taught how to manage up to your AD. You're not taught how to manage sideways to the women's coach, the football coach, and you're not taught to how to manage, 50 reports, maybe 25 of them direct reports from the players, your coaches, trainer, strength coach. So this topic, emotional intelligence, is more mainstream now.
Sure.
But I took a class in 2003 after I got let go at North Carolina at the Wharton School in Philadelphia, and they talked about emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And I'm scratching my head like, what's emotional intelligence? And then as I'm going through this class, I'm saying, oh my gosh, if I would have taken this class before I became a head coach, I would have been a better head coach.
Yeah.
And, Mike Bray, and I've talked this to Mike Bray, who took my place at Notre Dame, had a comment about being at Delaware. He says, I was at Delaware. I could make my mistakes at Delaware because there were only about 2,000 fans in the stands and it wasn't on TV.
Right.
So I could figure out what I needed to improve on, where my mistakes were, and then, it helped him become a better head coach at Notre Dame. And I think there's a lot of truth to that because, like they talk about lawyers and doctors, like they have a practice, right?
Right.
And always joke, like, I don't want lawyers and doctors to practice on me. I want them to have developed the skill well enough to perform on me.
Absolutely.
And, and I think coaches are the same way. Like, you practice, and where do you develop the skill to be a head coach? There's no real opportunity to be the head coach unless your head coach gives you a lot of freedom to run the program. And that's rare.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you that quick ascension, like you're saying, basically, if maybe you had gotten a head coaching job at maybe at a D2 school or the lower Division I school and were able to cut your teeth a little bit before you got put on this massive stage with these massive expectations, maybe that's a better setup for success at a higher level.
I think so. I think an assistant coach is not going to admit that, and he's not going to turn down Notre Dame.
Right.
I remember being an assistant at Kansas, and I did turn down a couple of jobs. And then there was a job that I really wanted that I thought was a fit was St. Louis. And because I recruited that area.
Yeah.
And, obviously it's a neighboring state to Kansas. And they hired somebody else, and I'm like, oh my God, did I wait too long?
Right.
You know, did I pass up on jobs I should have taken? And then the next year, as the head coach at Notre Dame. So, you know, I think part of it too, and, you know, I know you're a Christian.
Yeah.
You know, one thing that I've learned through all this in my 57 years now on earth is you have to trust the closed door, you know, and that's sometimes God doing you a favor by closing the door. And you think, why, God? I prayed for this. And he's like, no, I got something better, or this is really a bad spot for you.
Right.
And, you know, there are a couple of jobs that I desperately wanted over the last several years and didn't get. And after a couple of years, that program blew up. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what if I was working there? You know, thank you, Lord, for closing the door.
Right.
So,
okay. So, in the growth of your faith there, of trusting God about the closed door, when you were younger, where do you feel like maybe you could have developed your relationship with God a little bit more to trust him in, you know, because you're trying to do the best that you can. It's not like you were trying to tune God out, or you were trying to, you know, you were trying to do the best you can in your career. So what were things that maybe you could have done as a younger coach that might have allowed you to maybe being a little bit more in tune with what God had for you?
Yeah, I think, first of all, when God was closing doors on me as a young man, I was kicking them down. You know, I was trying to put my foot through them.
Right.
I didn't realize that was God closing the door, you know, and I think we all mature, you know, we mature at different rates, but I think you have a maturity as a leader and you have a maturity as a Christian, and that's a walk that I'm still trying to, you know, we all are on a journey, and some people are farther along on the path, like my wife and daughter, than I am, and I learn a lot from them. But you know, I think it's just a maturity, you know, and you know, I was probably impatient, but yet I was patient. I mean, I passed on jobs. I was there 7 years, and then you get the Notre Dame job, and then North Carolina comes along, and it's like, wow, I can't turn that down. You know, like, how do you turn that down? And I take it, but the thing, there's no handbook. You know, there's no handbook for taking that job, and not many people have been in that situation, except maybe the guys who followed John Wooden.
Right.
In terms of how do you manage up? And part of the managing up process is not only your athletic director and president, but in this case, it was Bill Guthridge and Dean Smith.
Yeah, because I remember you saying on one of the other podcasts that I listened to you on, while you had your office as the head coach at UNC, did they still have the Bill and Coach Smith still have an office there?
Yes, they did. They had it downstairs, and two secretaries that left me went to work for them. So the dynamic was not good.
Oh my goodness.
And I think that, exactly. So I think looking back, one of the things that I really needed to understand was managing change.
Yeah.
And the changes I made at Notre Dame were welcomed and embraced.
Right.
Those same changes that I tried to bring to North Carolina were not welcomed or embraced. Because the context was totally different.
Sure.
You know, Notre Dame hadn't had the success North Carolina had, so they welcomed any change. North Carolina, even though I was one of them, I came in and brought my own staff and made a couple of changes to the physical, you know, physical part of the office.
Sure.
And people were like, you know, looking at, you know, me and my staff like we were crazy. It was good enough for Dean Smith and Bill Guthridge. It should be good enough for you.
Right.
And so one of the hard lessons I learned was managing change. You know, you don't change anything within 25 feet of someone's office without their input.
Oh, right.
You know, those are the types of things, Colin, that you learn through experience in leadership classes and reading and seminars, and that aren't taught in our profession. So it is about leadership.
And so you learn so much by the experience and really by making the mistakes. But if you can then pass some of that along, I mean, right, that's where training comes from. It's for us to pass it down and model it. How do you think, you've been involved with the A-10, right? And how do you think in college basketball, how can we take leadership training from a basketball perspective and start to incorporate that into the coaching path of these coaches, for their career?
I think it's leaking in a little bit. I think that the NCAA has a program. I think I'm not sure if it's at the Final Four, where they're inviting 30 assistant coaches. I know Jay Billis is doing something like that in Charlotte. I've thought about doing that, because it is needed. And when I talk at clinics, I don't talk about X's and O's. I talk about leadership and leadership development and emotional intelligence. And it's something that is not discussed.
Right.
But it's more important than the X's and the O's, because if you fail in the leadership part of it, you're not going to get to draw up the play in the timeout.
Right. I mean, and what I'm taking from that is totally about the relationships, when you're saying managing up or managing your reports. I mean, it's really just about how you're building those relationships. And if we don't understand that, right, if we don't understand that or have any foresight going into it, it's likely we're just going to fall on our face.
Correct.
And how difficult, you say you are in a very, very unique situation with taking a head job of one of the most prominent, programs in the country, and still having Coach Smith and Coach Guthridge there. I mean, what was that? I mean, did you feel like you had the ultimate say or no?
Well, I did, because when I was hired, I really wanted to hear one thing, and it's your program, run it how you see fit. And that's what Coach Smith told me. And that's when I decided I'd take the job.
Right.
But I think one thing that we have to do is, he was recruiting me at the time, and I'm not faulting him,
Right.
But, that's not what he wanted. And that's where experience comes into play. Like, okay, someone can tell you something really with good intentions, but deep down, they're not comfortable with that.
Right.
And so that's where you got to read the body language. You got to understand someone's history. And I took things too literally. When that came out of his mouth, I said, okay, check, box checked. But I should have gone out of my way to mine for him his information on how he wanted the program run. I should have still given him a lot of opportunity for input. And that was my lack of experience in terms of, dealing with a dynamic like that. And I don't think many people have dealt with something like that. And so, I think that, it was something where I should have. I still viewed him as my coach, and he probably still viewed me as his player, as opposed to more of a contemporary. So I should have, visited with him more and asked for his input more and executed more of the things that he thought should have been executed. And a lot of it's not just basketball. A lot of it had to do with, where people sat in the arena. Think of people have been in those seats for 30 years, and he had control of about 300 tickets. That type of, those types of things, looking back, should have handled differently.
Yeah, and when you think about it, man, the we think about the head coach as the one who is dictating the huddles. They're, planning practice. They're delegating to their assistant coaches. But in reality, there's bigger forces at play. There's more things that are important on the relational side. Like you said before, if you don't get the leadership part right, then you don't even get to the X's and O's.
Right. And that's where Kevin White was interviewed, the AD at Duke, and and I listened to it, and he talked about the political savvy you need to have as a leader on a college campus.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of politics. You have the president, you have a provost, you have a vice president, you have an AD, you have, deans of different departments, you have admissions, you have a lot of people that have their own structure of power that you need to have a good relationship with all those people for your operation to run smoothly.
Sure. Which is not an easy thing, right?
No. Well, on top of trying to coach a team and recruit and, raise children.
Right. Right. I mean, part of your success has to do with how well your, 18, 19, 20-year-olds respond and perform. Right. And then you've got to be the politician that knows how to navigate all those other relationships. And you said,
correct.
You said that it was a painful exit at North Carolina. In that exit, what do you feel like you turned to? Or do you feel like, in a way, were you angry at God? Do you feel like there was times where you feel like it brought you closer to God? After that, that challenge, what did that look like?
I think, I think, God doesn't promise you a smooth path. It's not a perfect world. There's going to be trials and tribulations that are put in front of you. And I think that is, God saying, I'm going to, this will help bring you closer to me. And this will help build your character. Yeah. And I just wish he didn't put as big a challenge, like, God, you could have downgraded it from a tropical storm, hurricane to a tropical storm. But you know what? I at times jokingly say, but I think mean, like I had a lot of success early, and maybe God felt like I needed to be put in my place. Yeah. And he came down and slapped me in the back of the head and said, hey, you're not handling this like I want you to handle it. Mm. And so I firmly believe that. I think that when even people that aren't believers, if they're in a bad situation, what's the first thing they do? They said, help me, God, right? They pray. Right. And they don't even realize they're praying, but they're praying. And so when you go through a tough situation, I think it brings you closer to God and, closer to your family. Like, what matters most? Your family, your faith, and when you get to be a popular, celebrity type figure in any field, you can get off that path pretty easily.
Sure. Well, and the demands that come along with that field, but also internally, maybe even how we see ourselves or what we think of ourselves. It's easy to push God to the side when things are going really well and we are, everything's about us and we're getting what we want and we see ourselves going up and up and up and everybody's patting us on the back. It's easy for us to push God to the side. And sometimes that humble pie just tastes awful, but it's
this was a humble cake. It was a humble. I mean, this was like a big pie. Yeah. But, I probably, God felt I needed it. And I think it did help me in the long run, even though it was painful. And to some degree, it is still painful.
Yeah. And so what's next for you? You know, you've got all this experience. You're now on, you know, the leadership thing is certainly on your heart, and that's what you choose to talk about at clinics and where you go. So what's next on your plate?
Well, I'm not quite sure. There's some, you know, I've left the Atlantic 10. I do look to pursue, you know, some coaching opportunities and or media opportunities because, and I do want to, you know, I'm going to speak on leadership tomorrow at a corporate outing. So I like to discuss that because, you know, obviously so much carries over to corporate America.
Sure.
It's just, we don't always see it until there's a scandal.
Right.
So, you know, I like to, you know, if I'm not coaching, I'm still going to try to be teaching in some way, shape, or form, either through, you know, clinics or corporate events.
Yeah, I like it, man.
So,
Well, I so appreciate your time and you sharing your experience with us, and also what God's doing in your heart in terms of growing your faith, and your perspective on that has been terrific. And I wish you very well going forward. Hopefully we can connect. I know that we've got our coaches clinic coming up, and it doesn't work out for you to come to that, but we'll certainly be ringing you up for our next one. I wish you the best, Matt.
Thank you, Colin. I appreciate you, and I'd love to be on your podcast again.
Absolutely. Sounds great, Matt.
Have a good day.
You too.